Chapter 18, Section 1, The Age of Exploration. Europe gets ready to explore. In the 14 and 1500s, nations in Western Europe began exploring the world. They soon gained control of the Americas as parts of India and Southeast Asia as well. Why did they begin exploring in the 1400s? Many events came together to create just the right conditions for exploration. First, trade with Asia. As you may have read, in the Middle Ages, Europe began buying vast amounts of spices, silks, and other goods from Asia. In the 1400s, however, it became harder to get those goods. First of all, the Mongol Empire had collapsed. The Mongols had kept the Silk Road running smoothly. When their empire collapsed, local rulers along the Silk Road imposed new taxes on merchants. This made Asian goods more expensive. Next, the Ottoman Turks conquered the Byzantine Empire and blocked the Italian merchants from entering the Black Sea. The Italians had trading posts on the coast in the Black Sea where they bought goods from Asia. Now, they could no longer reach them. They had to trade with the Turks instead, and this drove the prices up even higher. Europe still wanted the spices and the silks of Asia. Anyone who could find a way to get them cheaply would make a lot of money. Merchants began looking for a route to East Asia that bypassed the Middle East. If they could not get there by land, maybe they could get there by sea. New technology. Even though Europeans wanted to go exploring, they could not do it without the right technology. The Atlantic Ocean was too dangerous and difficult to navigate. By the 1400s, they had the technology they needed. From the Arabs, Europeans learned about the astrolabe and the compass. The astrolabe was the ancient Greeks' device that they could use to find latitude. The compass, invented by the Chinese, helped navigators to find magnetic north. Even with these new tools, the Europeans needed better ships. By the 1400s, they began using triangular sails developed by the Arabs. These sails let a ship zigzag into the wind. They also began building ships with many masts and smaller sails to make ships go faster. A new type of rudder made steering easier. By the 1400s, these inventions came together in a Portuguese ship called the Carvel. With ships like the Carvel, Europeans could begin exploring the world. The rise of strong nations. Even with the new technology, exploration was still expensive and dangerous. For most of the Middle Ages, the European kingdoms were weak and could not afford to explore. The situation began to change in the 1400s. The rise of towns and trade helped make government stronger. Kings and queens could tax the trade in their kingdoms and then use the money to build armies and navies. Using the new power, they were able to build strong central governments. By the end of the 1400s, 4 strong kingdoms, Portugal, Spain, France, and England, had developed in Europe, and they had harbors on the Atlantic Ocean and were anxious to find a sea route to Asia. The question is, where to go? Did maps encourage exploration? By the 1400s, most educated people in Europe knew the world was round, but they only had maps of Europe and the Mediterranean. When the Renaissance began, however, people began to study ancient maps as well as books written by Arab scholars. 1,200 years earlier, a Greek-educated Egyptian geographer named Claudius Ptolemy had drawn maps of the world. His book, Geography, was discovered by the Europeans in 1406 and printed in 1475. With the invention of the printing press, books like Ptolemy's could be printed and sold all over Europe. Ptolemy's ideas about cartography, or the science of mapmaking, were very influential. His basic system of longitude and latitude is still used today. European cartographers also began reading the books written by Al-Adirus, an Arab geography. Al-Adirus had published a book in 1154 showing parts of the world known to the Muslims. By studying the works of Al-Adirus and Ptolemy, Europeans learned the geography of East Africa and the Indian Ocean. If they could find a way around Africa, they could get to Asia. Exploring the world. By the early 1400s, Europeans were ready to explore. England and France were still fighting each other, however, and Spain was still fighting the Muslims. This gave Portugal the chance to explore first. Who was Henry the Navigator? In 1419, Prince Henry of Portugal, known as Henry the Navigator, set up a research center in southern Portugal. He invited some sailors, cartographers, and shipbuilders to come and help him explore the world. In 1420, Portugal began mapping Africa's coastline and trading with Africa's kingdoms. It also seized the Azores, Madeira, and Cape Verde Islands. Soon after, the Portuguese discovered sugarcane would grow on these islands. Sugar was very valuable in Europe. To work in their sugar canes, the Portuguese had begun bringing enslaved Africans to the island. This was the beginning of the slave trade that would eventually bring millions of enslaved people to the Americas as well. In 1488, Portuguese explorer Bartholomew Dias reached the southern tip of Africa. 9 years later, Vasco da Gama rounded the tip of Africa and raced across the Indian Ocean and landed on India's coast. The water route to East Asia had at last been found. Christopher Columbus. While Portuguese explored Africa, an Italian navigator named Christopher Columbus came up with a daring plan to get to Asia. He would sail across the Atlantic Ocean. Columbus needed money to make the trip. The rulers of Portugal, England, and France all turned him down. Finally, in 1492, Ferdinand and Isabel of Spain said yes. Earlier that year, they had driven the Muslims out of Spain. They can now afford to pay for exploration. Columbus outfitted 3 ships, the Santa Maria, the Nina, and the Pinta. In 1492, they left Spain and headed west. As the weeks passed and the crew grew desperate, finally they sighted land, probably the island of San Salvador. Columbus claimed the land for Spain and then explored the nearby islands of Cuba and Hispaniola. Columbus thought he was in Asia. He made 3 more voyages to the region, but never realized that he had arrived in the Americas. Eventually, Europeans recognized that they had reached 2 huge new continents. Who was Magellan? Many Spaniards explored the Americas in the 1500s, but only Ferdinand Magellan tried to finish up what Columbus had set out to do. In 1520, he left Spain and headed west to sail around the Americas and then all the way to Asia. Magellan sailed south along South America. Finally, he found a way around the continent. The passage he found is named the Strait of Magellan. After passing through the stormy strait, his ship entered a vast sea. It was so peaceful, or Pacific, that he named the sea the Pacific Ocean. Magellan then headed west. His sailors nearly starved, and he had to eat leather, sawdust, and rats. Finally, after 4 months at sea, they reached the Philippines. After the local people killed Magellan, his crew continued west across the Indian Ocean, around Africa, and back to Spain. They became the first known people to circumnavigate or sail around the world. The first English and French explorers. As news spread about Columbus's journey, England decided to search for a northern route to Asia. In 1497, an English ship commanded by John Cabot headed across the Atlantic. Cabot arrived at a large island he named Newfoundland. Then he traveled south along the coast to present-day Canada, but did not find a path through Asia. Cabot disappeared on his second trip and was never heard from again. In 1524, France sent Giovanni da Vazzaro to map America's coast and find a route to Asia. Vazzaro mapped from what is today North Carolina north to Newfoundland, but found no path to Asia. 10 years later, the French tried again. This time they sent Jacques Cartier Cartier sailed past Newfoundland and entered the St. Lawrence River, hoping he found a passage to Asia. Cartier made 2 more trips to map the St. Lawrence River. After these trips, France stopped exploring. By the 1500s, French Protestants and Catholics were fighting a civil war, and there was no more exploring until it was settled. Spain fights England. After Columbus, the Spanish went on to build a vast empire in America. They forced enslaved North Americans to grow sugarcane and mine gold and silver. Later, they brought enslaved Africans to the region to work on the farms. Spanish nobles, called conquistadors, traveled to the Americas in hopes of becoming rich. Hernan Cortez conquered the Aztecs, and Francis Pizarro conquered the Inca. Soon after these victories, vast amounts of gold and silver began to flow to Europe from Spain's empire in the Americas. Meanwhile, England had become Spain's enemy. As you may have read, in 1534, King Henry VIII of England broke from the Catholic Church and made his kingdom Protestant. By the 1560s, the Dutch had become Protestant too, even though they were part of the Spanish Empire at the time. Spain was strongly Catholic and tried to stop Protestantism in the Netherlands. When the Dutch people rebelled against Spain, England came to their aid. To help the Dutch, Queen Elizabeth I of England let her privateers attack Spanish ships. Privateers are privately owned ships that have a license from the government to attack other countries. People nicknamed the English privateer Sea Dogs. They raided the Spanish treasure ships that were bringing gold back from America. England's raids frustrated Philip II, the King of Spain. In 1588, he sent a huge fleet known as the Spanish Armada to invade England. In July 1588, the Armada headed into the English Channel, the narrow body of water between England and Europe. The Spanish ships were large and had many guns, but were too hard to steer. The smaller English ships moved much more quickly. Their attacks forced the Armada to retreat north. There was a great storm that arose and broke up the Armada. The defeat of the Spanish Armada was an important event. The Spaniards were still strong, but England now had the power to stand up to them. This encouraged the English and Dutch to begin exploring both North America and Asia. The Commercial Revolution. When Spain built its empire in the Americas, Portugal began building a trade empire in Asia. In 1500, shortly after Vasco da Gama's trip, the Portuguese sent 13 ships back to Asia. Led by Pedro Alvarez Cabral, the Portuguese fought a war against the Muslim merchants in the Indian Ocean. After defeating the Arab fleet, the Portuguese built trading posts in Asia, China, Japan, and the Persian Gulf, and in the Moluccas, or Spice Islands of Southeast Asia. From these bases, they controlled most of Southern Asia's sea trade. What is mercantilism? As Europeans watched Spain and Portugal grow wealthy from their empires, they tried to figure out how they became rich. They came up with the idea of mercantilism. Mercantilism is the idea that a country gains power by building up its supply of gold and silver. Mercantilists believe the best way to do this is to export or sell to other countries more goods than you import or buy from them. If you export more than you import, more gold and silver flows from other countries than goes out. Mercantilists also thought countries should set up colonies. A colony is a settlement of people living in a new territory controlled by the home country. Colonists are supposed to produce goods their country does not have at home. That way, the home country will not have to import those goods from other countries. Trade empires in Asia. Mercantilism encouraged Europeans to set up trading posts and colonies in Asia and North America. By the end of the 1500s, Spain had set up a colony in the Philippines. The Spanish shipped silver to the Philippines from America and then used it to buy Asian spices and silk for sale in Europe. In the 1600s, the English and French merchants landed in India and began trading with the people there. In 1619, the Dutch built a fort on the island of Java in what is now Indonesia. They slowly pushed the Portuguese out of the spice trade. What are joint stock companies? Trading overseas was very expensive in the 1600s. Trading overseas was very expensive. In the 1600s, however, new ways of doing business developed in Europe. Historians call this the commercial revolution. Commerce is the buying and selling of goods in large amounts over long distances. To trade good long distances, merchants needed lots of money. They had to buy many goods and store them in warehouses and ship them over land and sea. They had to know what the people in the distant lands wanted to buy and what prices were like there. The new business created a new type of business person called an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs invest or put money into a project. Their goal is to make even more money when the project is done. Many projects were so large that a group of entrepreneurs had to come together and form a joint stock company. A joint stock company is a business that people can invest in by buying shares of the company. These shares are called stocks. What is a cottage industry? To trade over a long distance, merchants needed a large supply of goods. They also have to buy goods at low prices so that they can make money selling them at high prices everywhere. By the 1600s, merchants had become frustrated by artisans and guilds. They charged too much and could not make goods fast enough, so merchants began asking peasants to make goods for them. In particular, they asked peasants to make wool cloth. The peasants were happy to make extra money and glad to find work that they could do in their home. The system was called the putting out system. Merchants would buy wool and put it out to the peasants. This system is also called the cottage industry because the small houses and peasants were living in cottages. After the age of exploration, the economy in Europe, Africa, Asia, and America changed. Europe traded with the world. A global exchange of people, goods, and technologies, ideas, and even diseases began. We call this transfer the Columbian Exchange, after Christopher Columbus. Two important foods, corn and potatoes, were taken to Europe from North America. Corn was used to feed animals. Larger, healthier animals resulted in more meat, leather, and wool. The potato was also important. Europeans discovered that if they planted potatoes instead of grain, about 4 times as many people could live off the same amount of land. Other American foods, such as squash, beans, and tomatoes, also made their way to Europe. Tomatoes greatly changed cooking in Italy, where the tomato sauce became very popular. Chocolate was a popular food from Central America. By mixing it with milk and sugar, Europeans created a sweet that is still popular today. Some American foods, such as chili peppers and peanuts, were taken to Europe, but they also found their way to Asia and Africa, where they became popular. Both Europeans and Asians also began smoking tobacco and American plants. Many Europeans and Asian grains, such as wheat, oats, barley, rye, and rice, were planted by Americans. Coffee and tropical fruits, such as bananas, were brought to the Americas as well. Eventually, coffee and banana farms employed thousands of workers in Central and South America. New animals such as pigs, sheep, cattle, chickens, horses were also brought to the Americas. Chickens changed the diet of many people in Central and South America, while horses changed the lives of Native Americans in the Great Plains. Horses provided faster ways to move from place to place. As a result, Native Americans began hunting buffalo as their main source of food. A huge movement of people also took place after Europe obtained sugarcane from Asia and began growing it in the Caribbean. To plant and harvest the sugarcane, they enslaved millions of Africans and moved them to the Americas. Europeans also changed Asian society. With the guns and powerful ships, the Europeans easily defeated Arab fleets and Indian princes. Also, let me try that again. Across Asia, the Europeans forced local rulers to let them set up trading posts. Within a short time, the East Indian Company of England had built an empire in India, and the Dutch East India Company had built an empire in Indonesia. The arrival of the Europeans in Japan also changed society. Using guns and cannons imported from Europe, a new shogun was finally able to defeat the feudal lords, daimyos, and reunite Japan. Not everything exchanged between Europe and North America was good. When the Europeans arrived in America, they were carrying germs that could kill Native Americans. Many diseases, including smallpox, measles, and malaria, swept across America, killing millions of people.